I remember people by their hands. Faces I lose inside a week, but hands stay with me. The way Ruth's mother twisted her rings when she was lying. The way Daniel's father never once uncrossed his arms in all the years I knew him. So it means something that the first thing I noticed about the man in the gray coat was that his hands were empty. No phone, no order of service, no rice, no confetti, nothing. Just two bare hands folded in front of him like he'd come to a funeral and gotten the address slightly wrong. But that was later, that was after. The morning started the way good mornings do, which is to say nobody paid attention to it. Ruth was in the small room off the back of St. Albans with 3 hairpins in her mouth and a look on her face like she'd already forgotten how to breathe on purpose. I was doing up the row of buttons along her spine, 40 of them. I counted, because I count things when I'm nervous, and I'd been nervous since Thursday. She kept turning her head to talk to me, and I kept turning it back. Hold still, or you'll be crooked in every photo for the rest of your life. Frankie, she said my name like it was a whole sentence. Do I look like her? Like who? Like someone he'd wait for. I should have heard it then. I've gone back over that morning so many times it's worn thin, like a photograph you've handled too much. And every time I get to that sentence, I want to take her by the shoulders and ask her what she knew that she wasn't saying. But you don't do that on a wedding morning. You laugh, and you tell her she's being ridiculous, and you finish the buttons. So I laughed, and I told her she was being ridiculous, and I finished the buttons. The church filled up slowly. I could hear it through the wall, the particular sound a room makes when it's deciding to be happy, all those low voices and the shuffle of good shoes on old stone. St. Albans is the kind of place that smells like cold candle wax even in summer. Ruth had picked it because her grandmother was married there, and because Daniel had said he liked the light through the east window, which was the sort of thing Daniel said that made everyone believe he was deeper than he was. I want to be fair to him. I've spent 2 years trying to be fair to him, and I still don't know if I've managed it. Daniel Ashford was easy to like and hard to hold. He came from money that had gone quiet a generation back. The big house sold, the name still good at the bank. He laughed at his own jokes a half-second before the punchline, which should have been annoying and somehow wasn't. He remembered what you drank. He was kind to waiters and terrible with time. And Ruth had loved him for 3 years with the whole uncomplicated force of a person who has decided, finally, to stop protecting herself. At 11 the organist started the quiet music, the settling-in music, the music that says we're nearly there. At 1:15, the vicar came to the little room and told Ruth she looked radiant, which is what vicars say, and asked if we needed anything. At 1:30 he came again, and this time he didn't say anything about radiance. He just asked, very gently, whether anyone had heard from the groom. Ruth's smile didn't move. That was the thing that frightened me. A real smile is a live thing. It shifts, it breathes. Hers sat on her face like it had been pinned there. He's stuck in traffic, she said. The bridge, there's always something on the bridge. There is always something on the bridge. That much was true. We held onto it the way you hold a railing on a boat. The best man, Peter, went out to make calls and came back with his tie loosened and a color in his face that had nothing to do with the heat. He wouldn't look at Ruth. He looked at me instead, which is how I knew, and he pulled me into the corridor by the elbow. His phone's going straight through, Peter said. I went round his flat this morning to pick up the cufflinks. Frankie, the bed wasn't slept in. I thought he'd stayed at his brother's. I didn't think. He stopped. There's a bag gone, the gray hold-all. It's not in the wardrobe. He could have packed for the honeymoon. The honeymoon's Portugal, Wednesday. The tickets are on the kitchen table. I saw them. He rubbed his face with one hand, the palm dragging down over his mouth. The bag's gone and the tickets are on the table. I went back in and I did up an imaginary button on Ruth's dress so I'd have a reason to stand behind her, where she couldn't see me. In the mirror our eyes met and held. Tell me, she said. So I told her the true things because Ruth has never once in her life forgiven a kind lie. I told her about the phone and the bag and the unslept bed. I watched it land. She didn't cry. She reached up and very carefully took the pins out of the front of her veil, one at a time, and set them in a neat row on the dressing table, smallest to largest, and I understood that she was doing it so her hands would have somewhere to go. "Right," she said, "right." By noon the church knew. You can't keep 200 people happy with organ music forever, and the vicar, God bless him, went out and said the thing that had to be said in the fewest words it could be said in. There'd been a change of circumstances. The couple thanked everyone for their love and asked for their patience. I stood at the crack of the door and watched it move through the pews like weather, the turning heads, the hands over mouths, Ruth's mother going the color of the stone. Daniel's side of the church was thinner than it should have been, and I remember thinking that was strange, that his people had come in such small numbers, and then I stopped thinking it because there wasn't room in me for anything but Ruth. She wanted to leave by the front. Everyone told her to go out the back to the cars, to slip away, and she said no with a flatness that ended the conversation. If she was going to be a story, and she knew already that she was going to be a story, she would at least walk out the front door of it on her own feet. So we went out into the light, the two of us, down the long stone steps of St. Albans, while behind us the guests pretended to gather their coats. The bells weren't ringing. That was the loudest thing about it, the bells that weren't ringing. Somewhere a taxi idled. A pigeon crossed the empty road with the unhurried confidence of a creature that has never once been left. And the man in the gray coat was standing at the bottom of the steps. He wasn't a guest. I'd have remembered the coat, too heavy for June, and I'd have remembered the stillness. Everyone else on those steps was in motion, dabbing, murmuring, checking phones, and he stood in the middle of it like a stone in a stream. Older than us, younger than the fathers. 60, maybe. Gray at the temples, gray in the coat, a face that had been handsome once and had decided it wasn't worth the upkeep anymore. He came up 2 steps to meet Ruth, and I moved between them the way you do, but he wasn't a threat, or he didn't feel like one, and Ruth put a hand on my arm to hold me back. "Miss Callaway," he said, not a question, he knew her. "Do I know you?" "No," he said it kindly, "and I'm sorry for all of it and for this too." From inside the gray coat he took an envelope. Cream, heavy paper, no stamp. Her name on the front in a slanting hand that I did not recognize and that, I would learn, Ruth didn't recognize either. He held it out. When she didn't take it, he simply reached down and folded it into her hand, closed her fingers around it with both of his, and there it was, what I'd noticed, those empty, careful hands, and he said, so quietly I almost missed it under the sound of the idling taxi. "He didn't leave you. Whatever they tell you in the next few weeks, and they'll tell you a great deal, remember that I said this first. He didn't leave you." Then he turned and walked away down the road the pigeon had crossed, unhurried, the gray coat swinging. And by the time Ruth got her breath back enough to call after him, he'd gone round the corner by the war memorial, and there was nobody there at all. Ruth stood on the steps of the church where she had not been married in the dress with the 40 buttons, and she opened the envelope with her thumb. I read it over her shoulder. I shouldn't have, but I did. And I've never been sorry, because if I hadn't I don't think she'd have told me a word of what came after, and someone had to remember it. Someone always has to remember it. The letter was short, 4 lines. It wasn't in Daniel's writing. The rest of the letter went like this. I've read it enough times that I could write it out with my eyes shut, though I only ever saw it that once on the steps and once more later, when it mattered. By the time you read this I will already look guilty, and I need you to not believe it. There are things about your Daniel that his family has spent 30 years paying to keep quiet. I tried to make him tell you himself. He wanted to. He was afraid of what it would cost you, not him. If you want the truth, don't go to the police and don't go to his mother. Go to the last place he was happy. He'll have left it there. No signature, just the 4 lines and then the white of the page. Ruth read it twice standing up, and then she sat down, right there on the top step of St. Albans in her wedding dress, folded her knees to one side like a girl on a lawn and read it a third time. Her mother started down toward us and Ruth said, without turning round, "Not yet, Mum," in a voice that stopped the woman dead on the fourth stair. Sheila Callaway is not a person who stops. She stopped. "The last place he was happy," Ruth said, to me, to the letter, to the empty road. "What does that even? We were happy last week. We were happy this morning. I did his buttons this morning, Frankie, same as you did mine." That's a thing that stayed with me. She said it like the symmetry meant something, like the fact that they had each been buttoned into their good clothes by someone who loved them ought to have protected them both. I didn't tell her that I'd counted his the way I'd counted hers, because I hadn't been near his, because nobody had been near his, because he had never come. I got her up. I got her mother's coat around her shoulders because, June or not, she'd started to shake, the fine all-over tremble of a body that has run out of the chemical that keeps it upright. Peter brought a car round and we drove Ruth back to the flat she'd shared with Daniel for a year and 8 months, and it was only when we got to the door that any of us thought about the fact that Daniel might be inside it. He wasn't, but someone had been. I knew it before Ruth did because I notice things. It's the one thing I'm good for, and the umbrella stand by the door was wrong. Daniel kept a golf umbrella in it, black, enormous, a stupid thing he'd never once used in the whole time I'd known him. It was gone. And the little dish where they threw keys and coins had been moved. There was a clean ring on the dusty shelf where it had sat, and the dish itself was 2 inches to the left. And I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like the noticing of a person who wants there to be something to notice. But Ruth kept that flat like a photograph of a flat. Nothing moved in it that she didn't move. And the dish had moved. "Someone's been here," I said. Peter laughed, not because it was funny, but because he was frightened. "Daniel's been here." "It's Daniel's flat." "When? His bed wasn't slept in, you said. His phone's dead. But the umbrella's gone and the dish is moved, and Peter, look at the desk." The desk was in the front room under the window, and it was where Daniel did the small amount of work he did. He managed a bit of the family's remaining property, collected rents, that sort of thing. A job that existed mostly so he'd have somewhere to be. The desk had a lock. It was locked now. But the wood around the little brass keyhole was scored, fresh pale scratches in the dark grain, the kind you get when someone works at a lock with the wrong tool and too much hurry. Ruth ran her thumb over the scratches. "This was fine yesterday," she said. "I dusted in here yesterday." "You dusted the day before your wedding." She looked at me and something moved behind her eyes, quick gone. "I couldn't sleep. I cleaned. It's what I do." And I filed that away too, the way she said it, because it's the sort of thing that means nothing until suddenly it means everything. We didn't force the desk that night. I want you to understand what kind of state we were in. Ruth had been left at the altar 4 hours before, and half of London knew it, and her phone was going off in her bag like a trapped wasp, and her mother was in the kitchen making tea nobody would drink and saying at intervals that she had never trusted that boy, which was a lie. She'd adored him. She'd cried at the engagement. We were not detectives. We were 3 exhausted people in a room that had started to feel like a crime scene, without any of us being willing to say the word. So Peter went home, and Sheila went home eventually, prized loose by the promise that I would stay, and I stayed. Here I should tell you who I am, because I've been telling you about hands and buttons and umbrellas, and I haven't told you the one thing that matters, which is why I was there at all. My name is Frankie Doyle. I met Ruth Callaway when we were 19 and 20 respectively, working the same terrible summer at a garden center outside town, me on tills and her hauling bags of compost with a strength that surprised everyone, including her. We were friends inside a week and something more than friends inside a month, and then, this is the part people never understand, we were friends again, on purpose, by choice, for 14 years, and it was the best decision either of us ever made. I loved her. I want to be plain about that because the story doesn't work if I'm not. I loved Ruth Callaway from the age of 19, and I never once told her. And by the time Daniel came along, I'd made such a settled architecture out of not telling her that his arrival didn't even shake it. I was glad she was happy. I mean that. You can love someone and be glad they're happy with somebody else. Both things live in me still, and neither has ever canceled the other out. I tell you this so you'll trust me when I say I had no reason to want Daniel found, and every reason in the world. Both. All of it. A person is not a single clean thing. That first night Ruth slept finally on the sofa with her head in my lap and the wedding dress still half on because neither of us had the heart for the 40 buttons in reverse. And I sat awake and looked at the desk with its scored lock, and I thought about the man in the gray coat. He didn't leave you. If not left, then what? Taken. But taken people don't pack a gray hold all. And the man had known Ruth's name, and known she'd be blamed. No, that Daniel would be blamed. I will already look guilty. And known to come at exactly the moment she walked out the front, which meant he'd known she would walk out the front, which meant he knew her, or knew about her, better than a stranger has any business doing. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, Ruth's phone lit up on the coffee table. Not a call. A message from a number saved in her phone as a name I could read upside down in the dark. Marcus A. Daniel's brother. The message said, "Whatever the police ask you, you don't know anything. For his sake, please." I sat very still so I wouldn't wake her, and I watched the screen go dark, and I thought, the police haven't asked anyone anything. Nobody's called the police. It's 3 in the morning, and a man who told his brother's fiancée at 3 in the morning to lie to a police force that isn't involved yet knows something the rest of us don't. And I thought about the gray coat again. Don't go to the police and don't go to his mother. And here was the brother in the same hour, saying the same thing from the opposite side, say nothing, for his sake. And I couldn't for the life of me tell if the two men were on the same side or at war, only that they were both circling the same silence, and that Ruth was asleep in the middle of it with 40 buttons down her back and no idea yet how far this went. I didn't wake her, let her have the one night. There'd be little enough rest in the weeks to come, and I already knew, the way you know weather, the way you know a room deciding to be happy or a room deciding to be something else, that we were going to open that desk in the morning, and that I was going to spend a good part of the rest of my life wishing we'd left it locked. We opened the desk at 9 the next morning with a butter knife and a hairpin, and the specific determination of two people who have decided that whatever's inside can't possibly be worse than not knowing. We were wrong about that, as it turned out, but we didn't know it yet, and there's a mercy in not knowing. Ruth did the lock. She was better at it than me. She said her father had taught her, years back, on the drinks cabinet he kept locked and she kept getting into. And I filed that away too, another small tile in the mosaic of Ruth Callaway that I thought I'd finished years ago, and was only now realizing I'd barely started. The lock gave with a soft wooden cough, and the drawer slid open. Rent ledgers. That was the first thing, and the dullest, a stack of black cloth-bound books, the kind you buy from a stationer's that's about to go out of business, full of Daniel's slanting figures. Property addresses down the left, sums down the right, dates, initials. Ruth turned the pages of the top one with her thumb, and I watched her face do nothing, and then, on about the 40th page, stop doing nothing. "That's not right," she said. "What isn't?" "This flat, number 9 Alderney Court. He collects $400 a month on it. It's there every month, 400. Look," she ran her finger down the column. "And then in March it's 4,000. 1 month, 4,000, and then back to 400. She flipped forward. Here again, September. And this one, the shop on Weir Street, he gets 600, and then 1 month it's 6,500, and then it goes back." I looked over her shoulder. She was right. Threaded through 2 years of small, honest fourpenny sums were these sudden fat numbers, one a month or so, never the same property twice in a row, never explained. A tenant doesn't pay 10 times the rent for 1 month by accident. Somebody was moving money through Daniel's little job, using the rents as a coat to wear it in, and the sums came in, and the sums went out, and what was left behind in the ledger was a pattern so quiet you'd only see it if you loved the person who wrote it and knew the shape of his ordinary days. He was laundering, I said. The word sounded absurd in that flat with its dead fern and its dish 2 inches out of place. Ruth, someone was cleaning money through the family properties and Daniel was writing it down. Daniel wouldn't. She said it fast and then she heard herself, and she put the ledger down on the desk very gently, the way you put down something that might go off. Daniel wouldn't know how. That's the thing, Frankie, that's the thing you don't. He was hopeless. He forgot his own PIN. He let me do the taxes. He couldn't have organized this if you'd given him a year and a diagram. Then he wasn't organizing it. He was just holding the pen. She looked at me and I watched her arrive unwillingly at the same place I'd got to. Somebody organized it. Somebody who could. And Daniel, hopeless charming Daniel who forgot his PIN and let his fiancée do the taxes, had been the hand that held the pen. And a hand that holds the pen is the hand that hangs when the whole thing falls down. By the time you read this, I will already look guilty. Not guilty of leaving her. Guilty of this. And the man in the gray coat had known before she did, before the church had even emptied, that the ledgers would surface and point at Daniel like a compass points north. Under the ledgers there was a photograph. It was old, the color gone soft and orange the way they went in the 80s, and it showed 4 young men on the steps of a building I didn't recognize, all of them laughing at something out of frame. I knew Daniel's father at once. Ruth had shown me pictures, the crossed arms, the particular set of the jaw, much younger here, maybe 25, his arms slung round the neck of a man beside him. And the man beside him, laughing hardest of the 4, younger and darker-haired but unmistakable, the same handsome face that had decided it wasn't worth the upkeep. "That's him," I said. "Ruth, the man from the steps, the gray coat, that's him 30 years ago." She took the photograph out of my hand and held it up to the window light. 4 young men. Daniel's father and the gray coat man with their arms round each other, and 2 others I didn't know, and on the back in pencil, faded almost to nothing, someone had written 4 initials and a date. RAHF, JC, TD, AUG 89. HF, Ruth said. The letter, the handwriting. He wrote it himself then, the gray coat man, that's JC. No, HF. She turned the photo over and back. Frankie, my Daniel's father, was Richard Ashford. RA, that's him. So one of these 3 is the man who came to the church, and they were friends. They were young and they were friends, and something. She stopped. Something happened in 30 years, I finished, to turn friends into a man who comes to a wedding he wasn't invited to. There was one more thing in the drawer. Right at the back, pushed flat against the wood, a single key. Not a house key, too small, too flat, the kind that opens a locker or a box, with a round paper tag tied to it by string, and on the tag a number written in Daniel's slanting hand. 14. Ruth closed her fingers round it. And the strangest thing happened to her face. Not fear, not grief, but something I can only call recognition, as if the key had answered a question she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was a question. "I know what this is," she said quietly. "What?" "The last place he was happy." She looked up at me, and for the first time since the church there was something alive in her eyes, and I couldn't tell whether it was hope or dread, and I've since decided it was both, the way everything about that fortnight was both. He told me once early on, when we were still telling each other everything, that the only place he'd ever been properly happy as a boy was his grandfather's boathouse, on the estuary, before the family sold it. He said there was a lock-up there, a boat store, and every kid had a numbered box, and his was. She held the key up. The tag turned slowly on its string. 14. He said he'd left something in it he was never going back for, and I laughed, because who leaves something for 20 years, and he didn't laugh. She closed her hand again. He said, "One day I'll show you what a coward looks like at 14, And then he changed the subject and I let him, because we were in love and it was raining and there were better things to talk about than boathouses. Outside in the car park below the flat, a door slammed. We both went to the window without deciding to. There was a man crossing the tarmac toward the entrance of the building, quick head down, a phone at his ear. Not the gray coat. Younger, our age or near it, dark-haired in the kind of good plain suit that costs more than it wants you to know. I'd never met him, but Ruth made a small sound beside me, the sound of a held breath let go wrong, and I didn't need her to tell me. "Marcus," she said. "Daniel's brother. He said say nothing, he messaged in the night," he said. She was already moving, sweeping the ledgers and the photograph and the key off the desk and into the drawer of the sideboard fast, her wedding morning steadiness back in her hands. "Frankie, he can't know we've opened the desk. Whatever he is in all this, he can't know we've seen it." The buzzer went, long, insistent, a thumb held down on it. Ruth stood in the middle of the flat she'd shared with a man who'd vanished, with a launderer's ledgers and a 30-year-old photograph and a key to a boathouse locker hidden in the sideboard behind her, and she looked at me, and I saw her decide to become, for the length of this conversation, a woman who knew nothing at all. "Coming," she called, bright as anything, and went to let his brother in. Marcus Ashford came into the flat like a man who owned it, which, I would learn within the hour, he technically did. He'd inherited the freehold when their father died. Daniel had only ever been the tenant of his own life. "Ruth," he took both her hands. He was good, I'll give him that. He was warm and grave and exactly as sorry as a decent man ought to be. And if I hadn't seen the message glowing in the dark at 3 in the morning, I might have believed all of it. "I've been up all night. The police won't do anything for 48 hours. They keep saying he's an adult. He's allowed to leave, as if Daniel would, as if he'd do this to you." "You said say nothing." Ruth left her hands in his. "Clever. In your message, say nothing to the police. Why?" Something crossed his face and smoothed over. "Because they'll paint him as a runaway groom and close the file. If we want them to actually look, we can't hand them the easy story. Smooth. So smooth. Have you touched anything of his papers, his desk?" "His desk is locked," Ruth said. "I don't have the key." And I watched Marcus Ashford believe her, because she'd folded exactly one truth into the lie. The desk had been locked, and a lie with a true bone in it will walk further than a whole clean one. He nodded. He said he'd handle the police, handle the family, handle Ruth's mother even. She wasn't to worry about a thing, and he left 3 business cards on the counter as though grief could be resolved by phone. And he went. And the moment the door closed, Ruth sat down on the floor with her back against the sideboard that held the ledgers and started, very quietly, to laugh. The terrible thin laugh of a person who has just understood the size of the thing they're standing under. "He looked at the desk," she said, "twice. He asked me about the desk twice. Frankie, he doesn't want it found either, but not for the same reason as the gray coat man." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. "One of them wants me to know and one of them wants me not to, and they were both there before I'd even had breakfast." We drove out to the estuary the next morning. I won't pretend it was a plan. It was the only door that hadn't been shut in our faces. Go to the last place he was happy, he'll have left it there. And Ruth had the key with the paper tag warm in her fist the whole way, the way a child holds a coin they've been told not to lose. The boathouse was a ruin with ambitions. The family had sold it 15 years back, and whoever bought it had run out of either money or interest, so it sat half-restored on the gray water, scaffolding gone green, a padlock on the main doors that had rusted itself shut. But round the side, where Daniel had said the numbered boxes were, there was a low brick lockup with a row of little metal doors, and most of them hung open and empty, and one of them, 14, the number still ghosted on in white paint, was shut, and the key turned in it like it had been waiting. Inside box 14 there was a biscuit tin, and inside the biscuit tin there were 2 things. A cassette tape, unlabeled, and a boy's drawing done in felt tip of 4 stick men on a boat and under them in a child's hand, Dad and his friends. The day of the accident, I didn't tell. Ruth held the drawing for a long time. He was the boy, she said, on the boat. When he was, 10, 11, something happened on that water and he saw it and he didn't tell. One day I'll show you what a coward looks like at 14. She looked at the 4 stick men. Not 14 years old, box 14. He'd been carrying this in a locker for 20 years, Frankie, whatever it is. We had no cassette player. It took us the whole afternoon and a charity shop 3 towns over to find one. And we sat in the car in the charity shop car park with the windows fogging, and Ruth pressed play. And a young man's voice came out of the little speaker, thin and far away and dead 30 years. And I recognized it before Ruth did because I'd been staring at his handwriting for 2 days. The gray coat, HF Younger. Recording himself, or recording something, a confession made at the time and buried. The voice of a frightened young man saying that Richard Ashford's boat had gone out with 4 men and come back with 3. And the 4th, a man named Thomas, TD, the 4th initial, hadn't drowned by accident. And that the money that had started flowing to all of them afterward, the money that had kept the Ashford house standing and quietly ruined every one of them from the inside, was the price of the 3 surviving men's silence, paid year after year for 30 years by the people who'd wanted Thomas gone. The tape said the boy had been on the boat. The tape said, if you ever hear this, it's because I couldn't make it right while I was alive, and I'm sorry, and the boy shouldn't pay for what the fathers did. And Ruth, who had held it together through the church and the ledgers and Marcus Ashford's warm murdering hands, finally cried, not for the tape, she told me later, but for the sentence the boy shouldn't pay, because her Daniel had spent his whole hopeless, charming life paying, forgetting his PIN and letting her do the taxes and laughing half a second early. A man built entirely out of the effort of seeming light while carrying that. They found him on the 4th day. Not dead. I need to tell you that plainly because I spent 4 days certain of the opposite. He'd gone the morning of the wedding not to run from Ruth but to run at the thing. He'd taken the gray hold all and the ledgers he thought were the only copies, and he'd driven to Marcus, to have it out, to say I'm not signing another year of it. I'm marrying her and I'm done. And Marcus, decent, warm, freehold-owning Marcus, had done what the family always did with a problem, which was make it quiet. Not killed him. The Ashfords didn't kill people. That was rather the point. That was the whole 30-year horror of it. They let other people do that once, in 1989, and spent the rest of their lives being paid to keep it clean. Marcus had simply kept Daniel, talked him down, locked the conversation in a house in the country, taken his phone, waited for the wedding to collapse on its own so there'd be a runaway groom to explain the silence, a story already written. It was the gray coat man who broke it open. HF, Henry Frost, the 4th friend, the one who'd recorded the tape and fallen out with the others and spent 30 years unable to prove a thing, because the only witness was a boy who'd promised his father he'd never tell. Henry Frost had come to the church not to save the wedding but because he'd finally decided, dying, he was dying. That was the heaviness in the coat, that was the empty, careful hands, that he would spend the last of himself making sure the boy didn't pay. He didn't leave you. He'd known Ruth would be blamed for chasing off a groom, known Daniel would be blamed for the money, and he'd wanted one person on those steps to hold the true thing before the false one arrived. Ruth took the tape and the ledgers and the child's drawing to a journalist, not the police. The police, it turned out, had an Ashford or 2 folded into them the way a lie has a true bone in it, and the quiet came apart all at once, the way quiet does. Marcus was charged. Not with 1989, that water was too old and too gray to hold a case. With the newer things, the money, the false imprisonment, the ledgers in Daniel's own honest hand that turned out in the end to be the thing that hanged the brother instead of the groom. Here is the part I've never known how to tell. Daniel came back, and Ruth didn't marry him. Not out of anger. That's what everyone assumed. Jilted, humiliated, of course she wouldn't. But I sat with her the night she decided, and it wasn't anger, it was something worse and cleaner. She said, "He knew. Frankie, he knew all of it, the whole time we were choosing napkins and arguing about Portugal. He was carrying a dead man in a biscuit tin, and he let me love a version of him that didn't exist because he was too frightened to let me love the real one. And I understand it. I forgive it. I do." She turned the wedding key over in her fingers. She'd kept it, box 14. She kept it for years. But you can't build a life on a man's best silence. I'd only be marrying the boy who didn't tell. And I want to be married to someone who does. Daniel took it well, which is to say he took it the way he took everything, with a lightness that finally, at the end, I understood the weight of. He moved abroad. He writes to her at Christmas. He seems from a distance to be becoming a person who tells the truth slowly, the way respect develops, gradually in fits, the way the tape said the boy shouldn't have had to and the man was learning to. And me. I did up 40 buttons on a wedding morning 2 years ago and I never told her, and I still haven't. And if you're waiting for the part where the observer finally speaks, then I'm sorry, because this isn't that kind of story and Ruth isn't that kind of ending. We're friends. On purpose, by choice, the best decision either of us ever made, and now with one more true thing folded inside it that only I can see. She knows I notice hands. She's never asked me what I noticed about hers. Sometimes I think about the man in the gray coat, coming up 2 steps in the wrong weather with his empty, careful hands, spending the very last of a dying man's courage to press one true sentence into a stranger's fist. He didn't leave you. Henry Frost died that autumn. He never met Ruth again. He never knew how it ended, whether the boy paid or didn't, whether the fathers won or the truth did. I like to think he'd have been glad. I like to think that, on the worst morning of her life, a man she never knew stood at the bottom of the steps and made sure she walked out of it holding the truth instead of the story. And that the truth, even when it costs you the wedding and the man and the whole imagined life, is still the better thing to be left holding. She keeps the key on the windowsill. Number 14. The light comes through the east window and catches it some mornings, and she doesn't move it, and I don't ask her to.